He walked into his own five-star hotel wearing jeans and a baseball cap. The receptionist took one look at him and said, "I'm sorry, we don't have any availability." But the reservation system showed 47 empty rooms. What happened next will shock you. The marble lobby of the Grand Meridian stretched out like a cathedral of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Italian marble floors, while soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, their delicate fragrance mixing with the subtle scent of expensive leather and polished wood. Darius Freeman pushed through the revolving brass doors, his worn Levi's and faded Chicago Bulls cap a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him. His beat-up leather messenger bag hung loosely over one shoulder, and his white sneakers squeaked softly against the polished stone as he approached the reception desk. 28 years ago, Darius had started with nothing but a dream and a small loan from his grandmother. He'd worked every job in the hospitality industry: dishwasher, bellhop, night auditor, maintenance. He'd slept in his car between shifts, saved every penny, and learned the business from the ground up. Now he owned 17 luxury hotels across the country, including this flagship property in downtown Chicago. The Grand Meridian was his crown jewel, the culmination of everything he'd worked for. He'd personally overseen every detail of its construction, from the thread count of the sheets to the temperature of the towels. But success hadn't made him forget where he came from. Every few months, Darius would visit his properties unannounced, dressed down, wanting to experience what his guests experienced. He called it reality testing, ensuring that the five-star service his hotels promised was actually delivered to everyone, regardless of their appearance or perceived wealth. Today's test was about to begin. Behind the mahogany reception desk stood Vanessa Grant, a woman in her early 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp navy blazer. She was scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to the approaching customer. When she finally looked up, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the practiced smile faltering for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Good evening," she said, her tone professional but noticeably cooler than the greeting she'd given the well-dressed businessmen who'd checked in moments before. "I'm sorry, we don't have any availability." But the reservation system showed 47 empty rooms. What happened next will shock you. The marble lobby of the Grand Meridian stretched out like a cathedral of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Italian marble floors, while soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Fresh orchids adorned every surface, their delicate fragrance mixing with the subtle scent of expensive leather and polished wood. Darius Freeman pushed through the revolving brass doors, his worn Levi's and faded Chicago Bulls cap a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding him. His beat-up leather messenger bag hung loosely over one shoulder, and his white sneakers squeaked softly against the polished stone as he approached the reception desk. 28 years ago, Darius had started with nothing but a dream and a small loan from his grandmother. He'd worked every job in the hospitality industry: dishwasher, bellhop, night auditor, maintenance. He'd slept in his car between shifts, saved every penny, and learned the business from the ground up. Now he owned 17 luxury hotels across the country, including this flagship property in downtown Chicago. The Grand Meridian was his crown jewel, the culmination of everything he'd worked for. He'd personally overseen every detail of its construction, from the thread count of the sheets to the temperature of the towels. But success hadn't made him forget where he came from. Every few months, Darius would visit his properties unannounced, dressed down, wanting to experience what his guests experienced. He called it reality testing, ensuring that the five-star service his hotels promised was actually delivered to everyone, regardless of their appearance or perceived wealth. Today's test was about to begin. Behind the mahogany reception desk stood Vanessa Grant, a woman in her early 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp navy blazer. She was scrolling through her phone, seemingly oblivious to the approaching customer. When she finally looked up, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the practiced smile faltering for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Good evening," she said, her tone professional but noticeably cooler than the greeting she'd given the well-dressed businessman who'd checked in moments before. "I'm sorry, we don't have any availability." But the reservation system showed dozens of available rooms. "Completely booked?" he asked, his tone remaining neutral. "That's unfortunate. Are you sure there's nothing available?" "Absolutely nothing. I told you we're completely booked. You might try the Comfort Inn down the street. They usually have rooms available." The Comfort Inn. He felt something cold settle in his chest. The Comfort Inn was a budget property 3 miles away, in a completely different class of accommodation. The suggestion wasn't about availability, it was about assumption. "I see," he said quietly. "And if something were to become available, what would be the rate for a standard room?" Her expression grew slightly impatient. "Sir, as I mentioned, we're completely booked, but our standard rooms typically start at $450 per night." "$450," he repeated. The actual rate was $325. He knew because he'd said it himself. She was quoting him the inflated rate reserved for walk-ins who couldn't be easily verified. "Plus taxes and fees," Vanessa added, as if the price alone might discourage him from pursuing the conversation further. Darius reached into his messenger bag and pulled out his wallet. Inside was a black American Express Centurion card, the invitation-only card that had no preset spending limit. He placed it on the marble counter between them. Would this be sufficient to cover the room and incidentals? Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the card. The Centurion card was legendary in hospitality circles. Only the wealthiest individuals carried one. But instead of reconsidering her position, she seemed to grow more suspicious. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification," she said, her tone now bordering on accusatory. "And I'll need to verify the card." "Verify the card?" He raised an eyebrow. "Yes, we've had issues with fraudulent cards recently. Standard procedure." Standard procedure. He felt his jaw tighten. There was no standard procedure for verifying valid credit cards from potential guests. What Vanessa was describing was the protocol for suspected fraud, a protocol that should only be triggered by genuine red flags, not by someone's appearance or perceived wealth. "I understand," he said calmly, producing his driver's license. "Here's my identification." Vanessa took the license and the credit card, studying them with exaggerated scrutiny. She held the license up to the light, examined the holographic elements, and even ran her finger over the raised text. "Darius Freeman," she read aloud, her tone suggesting she found the name somehow suspicious. "And this is definitely your card?" "It is." "How did you obtain a Centurion card?" she asked, her voice now openly skeptical. The question hung in the air like smoke. Around them, the lobby continued its evening rhythm, guests checking in, concierges arranging transportation, the quiet murmur of conversations in multiple languages. But Darius felt a familiar isolation settling over him, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times in his life when people looked at him and saw threat instead of opportunity. "I applied for it," he said simply. "Applied for it," Vanessa repeated, as if the concept were foreign to her. "And what do you do for work, Mr. Freeman?" There it was, the question that had nothing to do with hotel availability and everything to do with judgment. The question that reduced him from a potential guest to a suspect, from a customer to a problem to be solved. "I work in hospitality," Darius replied, his voice remaining steady despite the storm building inside him. "Hospitality," Vanessa said, her tone suggesting she didn't believe him. "What kind of hospitality work, Mr. Freeman?" "The kind that requires me to travel frequently," he said, hence the need for a hotel room. Vanessa's expression grew more skeptical. "And your employer is okay with you staying at 5-star hotels?" The question revealed everything. In Vanessa's mind, someone who looked like Darius, dressed like Darius, couldn't possibly afford or deserve to stay at the Grand Meridian. She was creating barriers that didn't exist, applying scrutiny that was never applied to other guests. "My employer is very accommodating," Darius said, his voice taking on a slightly different quality, still quiet, but with an undertone that made Vanessa shift uncomfortably. She returned to her computer, this time actually looking at the screen.
Darius watched her scroll through the reservations, her frown deepening as she saw what he already knew, dozens of available rooms. "I'm sorry, finally, but even if we had availability, I'd need to speak with my manager about unusual circumstances." Unusual circumstances? What's unusual about a guest with valid identification and a credit card requesting a room? Vanessa's face grew slightly flushed. "It's just, we have certain standards." "What standards?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable, because the truth is that there were no standards being violated except the ones that existed in Vanessa's assumptions and prejudices. That's when she made her fatal mistake. "Look," she said, leaning forward slightly and lowering her voice as if sharing a secret, "this is a very exclusive hotel. Our guests expect a certain atmosphere. Maybe you'd be more comfortable somewhere else." The words landed like a physical blow. Darius felt the familiar sting of discrimination, but this time it carried an extra edge of betrayal. This wasn't just any hotel.
Vanessa seemed to realize she'd crossed the line, but instead of retreating, she doubled down. "Look, I don't make the rules. Management has certain expectations about our clientele." "Management's expectations," Darius said, his tone now sharp enough to cut glass. "And you're confident that management would approve of you turning away a paying customer with valid identification and a premium credit card?" Vanessa's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job is to turn away guests?" "My job is to maintain the hotel's reputation." The words hung in the air like a confession. Vanessa had just admitted that she saw Darius as a threat to the hotel's reputation, not because of any behavior or action, but simply because of who he was and how he looked. Darius felt something shift inside him. Not anger exactly, but a cold, focused determination. He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out his phone. "I'd like to speak with your manager," he said calmly. Vanessa's eyes widened. That's not necessary. I can handle this." "Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already handled it by refusing service to a qualified guest with valid identification and a premium credit card." Vanessa's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job is to turn away guests?" "My job is to maintain the hotel's reputation." The words hung in the air like a confession. Vanessa had just admitted that she saw Darius as a threat to the hotel's reputation, not because of any behavior or action, but simply because of who he was and how he looked. Darius felt something shift inside him, not anger exactly, but a cold, focused determination. He reached into his messenger bag and pulled out his phone. "I'd like to speak with your manager," he said calmly. Vanessa's eyes widened. That's not necessary. I can handle this." "Can you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already handled it by refusing service to a qualified guest with valid identification and a premium credit card." Vanessa's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "I'm just doing my job." Vanessa disappeared into the back office with visible reluctance. Darius could hear muffled conversation through the door, voices raised in what sounded like urgent discussion. Other guests in the lobby were now openly staring, phones appearing in hands as people sensed something significant was happening. 5 minutes later, Vanessa returned with a man in his 40s wearing an expensive suit and a nervous expression. His name tag read, Logan Chen, Assistant Manager. "Good evening, sir," Logan said, his voice carefully modulated. "I understand there's been some confusion about availability?" "No confusion," Darius replied evenly. "Your employee told me you were completely booked, then suggested I'd be more comfortable elsewhere because this hotel maintains a certain atmosphere." Logan's face went pale. Those were legally problematic words, the kind that could result in discrimination lawsuits and civil rights violations. He shot a sharp look at Vanessa, who was now studying her shoes with intense interest. "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," Logan said quickly. "We absolutely have availability tonight. In fact, we'd be delighted to accommodate you." "Would you?" Darius asked.
because 5 minutes ago, your employee was quite certain that wasn't the case." Logan's professional smile was starting to crack around the edges. "Sometimes our reservation system can be confusing. We definitely have rooms available." "Excellent," Darius said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "Then I'll take the presidential suite." The presidential suite was the hotel's most expensive accommodation, a 3,000-square-foot penthouse with panoramic city views, a private terrace, and a nightly rate of $4,500. It was also, Darius knew, currently unoccupied. Logan's smile faltered completely. "The presidential suite? I'm not sure that's... it's quite expensive." "How expensive?" $4,500 per night, plus taxes and fees. Darius placed his black Centurion card on the counter again. "Will this cover it?" Logan stared at the card, clearly recognizing its significance, but struggling to reconcile it with his preconceptions. "Sir, I have to ask, are you sure you understand the rate?" "I understand perfectly," Darius replied. "The question is whether you understand that discriminating against guests based on their appearance is illegal." The word illegal hung in the air like a thunderclap. Logan's face went from pale to ashen. Other guests in the lobby had stopped pretending not to listen and were now openly watching the confrontation unfold. "Sir, I assure you there's been no discrimination," Logan said, his voice tight with panic. "We treat all our guests equally." "Do you?" Darius asked. "Because I've been standing here for 15 minutes being told that rooms don't exist, that I need special verification, that I might be more comfortable elsewhere because this hotel maintains a certain atmosphere." Logan had no answer because there was no answer that didn't confirm exactly what Darius suspected. He had profiled him based on appearance, made assumptions based on stereotypes, and acted on prejudices that had no place in his hotel or any other. Darius pulled out his phone and began recording. "For the record, I am Darius Freeman, owner and CEO of Freeman Hospitality Group. I entered my own hotel tonight as a paying customer and was denied service based on discriminatory assumptions about my appearance and worthiness." He turned the camera toward Logan and Vanessa. "These employees refused to provide available accommodations, demanded additional verification not required of other guests, and explicitly stated that I would be more comfortable elsewhere because this hotel maintains a certain atmosphere." Logan looked like he might vomit. Vanessa was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Mr. Freeman," Logan said desperately, "please, let me explain. This is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this." "Fix this?" Darius asked. "How exactly do you fix discrimination? How do you fix the fact that your employee told me I don't belong in my own hotel?" Logan had no answer, because there was no answer that didn't confirm exactly what Darius suspected. She had profiled him based on appearance, made assumptions based on stereotypes, and acted on prejudices that had no place in his hotel or any other.
Darius ended the recording and slipped his phone back into his pocket. "Mr. Chen," he said formally, "you are relieved of duty pending a full investigation. Please surrender your keys and access cards." Logan's face went white. "Sir, please, I have a family. This job, it's everything to me." "It was everything to you," Darius corrected, "but you chose to value assumptions over service, prejudice over professionalism. Those choices have consequences." He turned to Vanessa, who was still crying silently. "Miss Grant, you're terminated, effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings and leave the property." "Please," Vanessa whispered. "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't want to know," Darius replied, his voice carrying both disappointment and finality. "You saw what you expected to see and acted on those expectations. That's not a mistake, it's a choice." As security arrived to escort Vanessa from the building, Darius turned to address the lobby full of guests who had witnessed the entire confrontation. The crowd had grown. people emerging from elevators and restaurants to see what was happening. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily through the space, "I want to apologize for the disruption to your evening. What you've witnessed tonight represents a failure of the values that the Grand Meridian was built to uphold." He paused, looking around at the faces watching him, some shocked, some understanding, some uncomfortable with the truth that had been revealed. "I founded this hotel chain with a simple philosophy: exceptional service for every guest, regardless of their background, appearance, or perceived status. Tonight, that philosophy was violated by my own employees in my own hotel." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several guests nodded in understanding, while others shifted uncomfortably with the truth that had been revealed. "Moving forward," Darius continued, "every employee of Freeman Hospitality Group will undergo mandatory bias training. We will implement new protocols to ensure that discrimination of any kind results in immediate termination, and I will be personally conducting regular unannounced visits to ensure these standards are maintained." He looked directly at several guests who had been recording the incident. "I encourage you to share what you've witnessed tonight, not to shame my company, but to start conversations about the prejudices that still exist in our society and in our service industries." An elderly white gentleman in an expensive suit raised his hand. "Mr. Freeman, how do we know this isn't just a publicity stunt?" Darius met his eyes directly. "Sir, if you think being humiliated and discriminated against in my own hotel is good publicity, then you've missed the point entirely. This was a test that we failed spectacularly. The question now is whether we learn from that failure or pretend it never happened." A young black woman in the crowd spoke up. "How long has this been going on? How many other guests have been treated this way?" "I don't know," Darius admitted honestly, "but I intend to find out. We'll be conducting a comprehensive review of all our properties, interviewing staff and guests, and implementing changes to ensure this never happens again." As the crowd began to disperse, many guests approached Darius individually. Some offered support, others shared their own experiences with discrimination in hotels and restaurants. A few complained that he had been too harsh, that good employees were hard to find. But the conversation that stayed with him came from a teenage girl who couldn't have been more than 16. "Mr. Freeman," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say thank you. I work part-time at a restaurant, and I see how some customers get treated differently. Most of the time, nobody with power does anything about it. You did something." Her words hit him harder than any of the business implications or media coverage. This wasn't just about corporate policy or customer service training. It was about the message that discrimination sends, that some people matter less than others, that respect is earned through appearance rather than humanity. Over the following weeks, the incident at the Grand Meridian became a case study in corporate responsibility and the persistence of unconscious bias. Video footage of the confrontation spread across social media platforms, generating millions of views and sparking conversations about discrimination in the hospitality industry. Darius found himself at the center of a media storm. Some praised him for taking decisive action and using his platform to address systemic issues. Others criticized him for being too harsh, arguing that the employees had simply made an honest mistake. But Darius knew better. What had happened wasn't a mistake. It was the predictable result of biases that existed throughout society and had infected his own organization despite his best intentions. The changes he implemented were swift and comprehensive. Every Freeman Hospitality Group property underwent immediate review. Guest feedback systems were overhauled to better capture experiences of discrimination. Mystery shoppers from diverse backgrounds began regularly testing the customer experience across all locations. Most importantly, Darius instituted a new policy.
Any employee found to be discriminating against guests would be terminated immediately, regardless of their position or tenure. There would be no second chances, no remedial training, no opportunities for redemption. Discrimination was a choice, and choices had consequences. The results were immediate and measurable. Customer satisfaction scores improved across all properties. Online reviews began highlighting the welcoming atmosphere and respectful service. Employee retention improved as staff members felt more confident in their company's values and more empowered to address discrimination when they witnessed it. But the most meaningful change was subtler. Darius began receiving letters from guests who had previously felt unwelcome in upscale establishments. Black professionals who had been questioned about their ability to pay. Latino families who had been given inferior rooms despite paying full price. Asian business travelers who had been subjected to additional scrutiny. They wrote to thank him not just for the policy changes, but for the public acknowledgement that their experiences were real, valid, and unacceptable. 6 months after the incident, Darius was invited to speak at a conference for hospitality industry executives. His presentation, titled "The True Cost of Discrimination," became one of the most watched speeches in the industry's history. Discrimination isn't just morally wrong, he told the packed auditorium. It's bad business. When you judge customers based on appearance rather than treating them with universal respect, you lose revenue, damage your reputation, and create legal liability. He shared data from his own properties showing how the implementation of strict anti-discrimination policies had improved both customer satisfaction and financial performance. But more than that, he continued, discrimination betrays the fundamental promise of hospitality. Our industry exists to welcome travelers, to provide comfort to strangers, to create experiences that bring people together. When we allow prejudice to influence our service, we betray that promise. The speech sparked industry-wide conversations about bias training, hiring practices, and corporate culture. Several major hotel chains implemented similar policies, and hotel schools began incorporating anti-discrimination training into their curricula. But the most significant impact was on Darius himself. The incident had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own organization and the society it operated within. It had reminded him that good intentions weren't enough, that creating truly inclusive environments required constant vigilance, regular assessment, and the courage to take action when values and practices diverged. 1 year after the incident, Darius returned to the Grand Meridian for another unannounced visit. This time, he wore his usual business attire, a tailored suit, expensive shoes, and the confident bearing of a successful executive. But he wasn't alone. Beside him walked Marcus Rivera, the CEO of Liberty Trust Bank, who had become a friend and ally in the fight against discrimination in corporate America. Marcus was dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, and a simple polo shirt. They approached the reception desk together, curious to see how the new staff would handle the situation. Behind the counter stood a young woman with a warm smile and genuine enthusiasm. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Grand Meridian. How can I help you tonight?" "We'd like 2 rooms," Marcus said, his voice carrying none of the authority of his CEO position. "Something comfortable, if you have availability." "Absolutely," the receptionist replied without hesitation. Her fingers flew over the keyboard as she checked availability. "I have several excellent options available. Would you prefer city views or garden views?" No questions about employment, no demands for additional verification, no suggestions that they might be more comfortable